Triple H breaks down in tears after Ric Flair's heartbreaking diagnosis. WWE legend Ric Flair has been diagnosed with skin cancer at 76, and Triple H's emotional reaction will leave you speechless. In this emotional video, we cover the heartbreaking moment when Triple H learns about Ric Flair's recent skin cancer diagnosis. A raw, emotional tribute from one icon to another. This clip showcases the bond between two of wrestling's greatest legends and the very human reality behind the spotlight. Ric Flair. The name alone still echoes through the halls of wrestling history like a battle cry, a defiant "whoa" that once lit up arenas across the globe. But behind that iconic swagger, behind the glitz, robes, and championship belts, lies a man who has endured more than most could ever imagine. And now, at 76 years old, that same man faces a battle unlike any he's ever known. Skin cancer. A diagnosis that shook the wrestling world to its core. But no one was hit harder than his longtime friend, brother-in-arms, and protege, Triple H. What followed wasn't part of a scripted rivalry or backstage drama. It was real, raw, and deeply human. A legend, watching another crumble under the weight of time, illness, and mortality. And when Triple H broke down in tears upon hearing the news, it wasn't just a moment, it was the unraveling of decades of shared history, triumph, pain, and brotherhood. Ric Flair has faced death before. But something about this diagnosis felt different. It wasn't sudden or explosive like his past health scares. It was slow, creeping, inevitable. Skin cancer, particularly at his age, doesn't strike like lightning. It crawls. It waits. And for someone whose life was built on being invincible, on surviving plane crashes, career-ending injuries, and multiple near-death experiences, this felt like a cruel twist of fate. A punishment for a life lived too fast, too furiously. A reminder that even gods must bow to time. For Triple H, real name Paul Levesque, the news hit harder than any steel chair ever could. Sitting in his office at WWE headquarters, the call came in quiet. No dramatic entrance. No music. Just silence, then a trembling voice on the other end delivering news that would break him. The man who had mentored him. The man who had stood in his corner through wars in and out of the ring. The man who danced between life and death more than once. Ric Flair, his Ric Flair, was now fighting again. Only this time, he didn't have an opponent. He had a disease. Witnesses say Triple H didn't speak at first. He just stared at the floor, processing what he had heard. Minutes passed like hours before he stood up, walked to the window, and quietly broke down. Tears. Not the kind you wipe away with a smirk. The kind that force their way out because the weight is too much to bear. The kind of tears that only come when someone you love is hurting and there's nothing you can do to stop it. What many fans forget is that the bond between Flair and Triple H was never just professional. It was personal. Deeply personal. It began decades ago in locker rooms filled with sweat, ego, and ambition. At a time when Ric Flair was already a god in wrestling and Triple H was just a hungry student of the game. But what started as respect soon evolved into a bond built on more than shared victories. It was built on moments the cameras never captured. Hospital visits. Late-night calls. Personal tragedies. Triumphs outside the ring. Triple H didn't just look up to Ric Flair, he loved him. Like family. Like a father. Like a mentor you can never repay. And this diagnosis didn't just remind him of Ric's fragility, it reminded him of his own. That even the strongest fall. That even legends fade. As the news spread quietly through the WWE locker room, it wasn't just Triple H who was shaken. Superstars young and old stopped in their tracks. Some wept. Some stood in silence. Ric Flair wasn't just a Hall of Famer, he was the foundation. The man whose name was chanted in arenas even long after he left the stage. The man who built a style, a swagger, a legacy that became the blueprint for generations. And now he was sick. Vulnerable. Human. An emotional tribute released on WWE's internal network just hours after the news broke. Triple H addressed the staff. His voice cracked before he even got through the first sentence. "This isn't a promo," he said. "This is pain. Real pain. Ric's given us everything. He gave me everything. And now he's in the fight of his life, again." He paused, then closed his eyes. "I've seen him bounce back from things no one should survive. I've watched him get stitched up backstage and still smile for the fans. But this time it's different." The speech, originally meant to be private, quickly went viral after parts of it leaked. Fans flooded social media with tributes, "Get well soon," messages, and vintage clips of Flair at his finest. In an era where attention spans are fleeting and respect is often short-lived, the outpouring of love for Ric was overwhelming. Fans remembered the robes, the battles, the promos, but they also remembered the man. The one who never gave up, even when the odds were stacked higher than the top rope, and yet, in the eye of the storm, Ric Flair remained Ric Flair. In a short video message posted to his Instagram, his skin visibly tired, but his spirit unshaken. Flair addressed the diagnosis in his own way. "They say I've got skin cancer," he said, pausing only to take a breath. "Well, I've had heart surgeries. I've had organ failures. I've been pronounced dead and came back. And now this? Whoa. You think I'm done? You don't know the nature, boy." He smiled. But behind that smile was something deeper: fear, perhaps. Or maybe acceptance. Triple H, upon seeing the video, reportedly broke down a second time. Not because Flair looked weak, but because he still refused to admit he was hurting. It was classic Ric. Defiant until the very end. "I don't think he knows how to be afraid," Triple H told close friends in private. That's what makes him so powerful and so tragic. Over the next few days, Triple H became more than just a WWE executive. He became a caretaker. A friend on a mission. Sources say he began organizing around-the-clock medical support for Ric, using his connections to ensure Flair had access to the best specialists in the country. Private doctors. Custom treatment plans. Whatever it took, but it wasn't just about treatment. It was about presence. Triple H reportedly flew out to be with Ric just days after the diagnosis. Not as an executive. Not as the game. But as Paul. As the kid who once stood in awe of Ric Flair backstage, now holding the hand of the man who could barely lift his own. Seeing him like that, Triple H later told a friend, "I wasn't ready. I don't think I'll ever be." That visit, emotional and raw, wasn't recorded. It wasn't televised. There were no promos or entrance music. Just silence. Just two men sitting in a room, one battling cancer, the other battling grief. Ric, reportedly trying to lighten the moment, looked up from his hospital bed and whispered, "You still can't beat me in a promo, Paul." They both laughed. But the laughter was short-lived, because while Ric tried to act tough, his condition was worsening. The treatments were aggressive. The fatigue was unbearable. And the weight of his age was beginning to show. The man who once strutted across arenas now struggled to stand. And that broke Triple H in ways he couldn't express. To the outside world, Triple H has always been a figure of control. The cerebral assassin. The COO. The man who turned NXT into a movement. But in that hospital room, none of that mattered. He was just a man watching his hero fade, and yet, through the tears, the fear, and the helplessness, something else emerged. Gratitude, because as hard as it was to watch Ric suffer, it was a gift to still have him here. To hear his voice. To see him fight. And to tell him, perhaps for the first time in a long time, just how much he meant. "I never got to say thank you the way I should have," Triple H admitted. Not just for the career, but for the belief. For the love. For being the one who never let me quit. That kind of gratitude can't be scripted. It can't be faked. It's the kind that comes from years of shared scars, visible and invisible. From knowing that no matter how many championships you win, the real victories happen in moments like this. When all the titles and egos fall away, and what's left is just love. Unspoken. Unbreakable. And so, as Ric Flair faces yet another brutal chapter in his already legendary life, one thing is clear: he's not facing it alone. Not with fans chanting his name from around the world. Not with an industry ready to stand by him. And certainly not with Triple H, his friend, his brother, his shadow walking every step of the way beside him, because some bonds in wrestling don't end with retirement. They begin there, and for Ric Flair and Triple H, this isn't the end. It's the start of one final fight. In the days following the public revelation of Ric Flair's skin cancer diagnosis, the energy backstage at WWE events shifted. It was as if the heart of the locker room had been pierced. Younger superstars, many of whom had never shared the ring with Flair, began speaking of him with reverence, not because of his 16 world titles, but because of the living legacy he represented. Seth Rollins, in an off-camera moment captured by WWE's documentary team, shook his head and said quietly, "He's why I wear this robe. He's why I wanted to be more than just a wrestler." Ric Flair is, everything this business stands for. But for Triple H, those words weren't enough. He wasn't interested in tribute videos or backstage segments. He wanted action. In what sources now confirm was a private conversation with Vince McMahon, Triple H proposed something unprecedented, a full WWE-produced documentary chronicling Flair's health journey. Not a tribute, not a farewell, but a living record. Something real, something raw, and most importantly, something that would give Ric the voice he deserved while he was still able to speak it. First, there was hesitation. WWE had never done something quite so emotionally intimate with an active diagnosis hanging in the air. But Triple H was insistent. This isn't about ratings. This isn't about merchandise. This is about telling the truth. And Ric's earned that. McMahon reportedly agreed, offering the full support of WWE's media team to begin filming. The crew arrived at Flair's home in Georgia within the week. What they found wasn't a man defeated, but a man transforming. Gone were the flamboyant robes and perfectly styled hair. In their place, hospital wristbands, boxes of medication, and a wrestling legend in a recliner, smiling weakly but still defiant. Still Ric. Still the nature boy. "Welcome to Casa Flair," he said with a smirk as cameras rolled. "We don't cry here. We fight." Triple H sat beside him during much of the filming. There were moments of laughter, reminiscing about old matches, botched promos, and locker room chaos from the 90s. But there were also moments where Ric's voice would tremble. When he'd reach for his chest as if searching for strength that wasn't there. When the pauses between sentences stretched too long. When he'd wince from the burning side effects of radiation. In those moments, Triple H would just place a hand on his shoulder. No words. No acting. Just presence. A silent show of brotherhood. And then came a scene that would later become the centerpiece of the documentary. Triple H, looking directly into the camera, began speaking about mortality, not as a performer, but as a man. You grow up thinking your heroes will always be there. You believe that because they've survived so much, they'll outlive the rest of us. But that's not how life works. Life doesn't care how many titles you've won. It doesn't care how many people chant your name. It just takes. He swallowed hard, eyes visibly wet, and watching Ric fight this, it reminds me of something he once told me after a match. He said, being great isn't about how loud the crowd gets. It's about how many times you can get up when no one's watching. That's what he's doing now. And I've never been more proud of him. The clip, once aired, brought fans to tears. The comments flooded in. Thousands. Millions. Wrestling fans, cancer survivors, people who had never watched a match in their lives, all moved by the raw humanity between these two legends. The outpouring of love for Ric reached a fever pitch. Celebrities, fellow wrestlers, even political figures began speaking publicly about how Ric's fight inspired them. But still, behind the camera, the reality remained harsh. Flair's condition was fluctuating. There were good days, days where he could walk the hallways with help, crack jokes, and even mimic his old strut with a walker. But there were also dark days. Days where pain gripped his entire body. Days where he couldn't speak. Days where he looked up at Triple H and whispered, "If this is it, I'm okay." Those were the moments that shattered Triple H. For a man who had spent decades building empires, dominating storylines, and leading a company, he had never felt so powerless. He couldn't book a match to fix this. He couldn't script a comeback. All he could do was watch and hope. And pray, but even amidst the anguish, Flair's fighting spirit never wavered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Georgia horizon, Ric insisted on going outside. He sat in his favorite chair on the porch, looked out at the sky, and asked for a glass of bourbon. Doctors had warned him not to drink, but Ric Flair had never been one to listen. "One last sip," he said. "For the old days." Triple H stood by him, torn between concern and respect. He poured half an inch into the glass, handed it to Ric, and the two clinked their cups together without a word. The moment felt like something out of a movie. But it was real. Two titans of the wrestling world, one facing mortality, the other confronting grief, sharing one final ritual of celebration. "You know," Ric said, looking out across the trees, "if I go tomorrow, I'm going with no regrets. I lived it all, man. I danced with death. I wore the gold. I flew on jets I didn't pay for. And I made more people say, whoa, than anyone in history." Triple H smiled, but the weight of the moment was almost too much. "You changed everything," he said softly. "And not just for us. For me." The silence between them stretched long, filled with memory, and then Ric, ever the showman, grinned and said, "Don't start crying again, Paul. The cameras aren't rolling." But the truth was, they didn't need to be. That moment, that energy, that quiet understanding, it captured everything. In the weeks that followed, the wrestling world began preparing for a future where Ric Flair might not be around. WWE began working with Make-A-Wish to compile fan messages into a special tribute book. AEW and Impact Wrestling, companies that had once been rivals to Flair's legacy, offered their own messages of love and support. The boundaries of the wrestling world dissolved in a unified expression of gratitude. It was no longer about brands or contracts. It was about Ric. Meanwhile, Triple H continued to visit. He didn't publicize it. He didn't post about it. He just showed up. Because that's what Ric had done for him, time and time again. Through injuries, through personal loss, through career changes. Ric was there. And now it was his turn to return the favor. Doctors remain cautiously optimistic. The treatments are brutal, but there are signs of progress. Tiny victories. A scan that showed slight improvement. A day where Ric could walk unaided for more than 5 minutes. They're not miracles, but they're enough to keep hope alive, and sometimes, hope is all you need. Triple H knows this. And so, he waits. Watches. Listens. And holds on to the belief that the Nature Boy, the man who once told the world to be the man, you gotta beat the man, still has one more fight left in him, and maybe, just maybe, this time, the man wins. As the months passed, Ric Flair's health status became the quiet pulse of the wrestling community. Every backstage conversation, every social media rumor, and every closed-door executive meeting seemed to orbit around one question: how is Ric doing today? And while no official WWE press release was ever issued, the answer came in subtle ways. A glimpse of Ric walking through his backyard with his granddaughter. A short, but defiant tweet simply saying, "Still stealin' and profilin'. One day at a time." But the most revealing moment came not from Ric himself, but from Triple H. On a somber Monday morning, WWE uploaded a 5-minute, black-and-white video to its official YouTube channel. No music. No fancy graphics. Just Triple H alone, seated in an empty performance center ring. The silence was deafening. His voice broke that silence with the weight of 1,000 memories. "There comes a time when you stop thinking of someone as a legend," he began, staring straight into the lens. "And you start thinking of them as family." He paused. "I've had the privilege of sharing the ring with Ric Flair. I've had the honor of riding beside him on the road, of learning from him, of watching him light up arenas. But in these past few weeks, I've seen something I never expected to see. I've seen him weak. I've seen him tired. And I've seen him scared. And in all of that, I've never loved or respected him more." Triple H's voice cracked, and for a moment, he turned away from the camera. When he turned back, tears glistened in his eyes, but he didn't apologize for them. "We're taught as wrestlers to be invincible. to never let the audience see a sweat. But life doesn't follow a script. And right now, Ric is in the toughest match of his career. But let me tell you something, he's fighting like hell. The video ended without a flashy outro. No music swells. No logo splash. Just Triple H saying one last thing, keep him in your thoughts. Keep him in your hearts. Because Ric Flair is not done. Not yet. The wrestling world erupted. Clips from the video spread across every major social media platform. Hashtags like #FightForFlair, #WasStrong, and #NatureBoyForever began trending globally. WWE superstars posted tributes, past opponents shared unseen photos, and thousands of fans uploaded voice messages and videos cheering Ric on from every corner of the globe, and through it all, Triple H remained quietly steadfast. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need validation. He only wanted one thing, for his friend to keep fighting. And for the world to know just how much that fight meant. Meanwhile, Ric's condition continued to walk the razor's edge between danger and resilience. There were moments of triumph, blood work improvements, less fatigue, even a day when he managed to shoot hoops with his grandson. But there were also terrifying nights. Nights where his breathing slowed. Nights where his family sat silently in the dark, unsure if he'd make it to morning, yet somehow he always did. Doctors were stunned. We expected the disease to progress more aggressively, one specialist reportedly said. But his willpower, it's unexplainable. He keeps pushing beyond what we medically anticipated. Friends and family would later say that Flair had one secret weapon. He didn't want to let Triple H down. He told me, Charlotte Flair confided in a rare emotional interview, that he owed Paul his life. That if Paul could cry for him, if he could sit by his bed every day when he could be running the biggest wrestling company in the world, then he could keep fighting. And so, the Nature Boy kept pushing. Every treatment. Every radiation burn. Every sleepless night. Not for himself, but for the man who never walked away. One morning, as the Georgia sun rose slowly over the Flair residence, Ric asked to go outside again. He sat in the same chair on the porch as before, this time with a blanket over his knees and his daughter Charlotte beside him. Triple H had flown in that weekend without telling anyone. The three of them sat quietly, watching the sun climb. And then Ric, barely audible, whispered, "Do you think they'll remember me after I'm gone?" Charlotte squeezed his hand. Triple H leaned forward and looked him in the eye. "Ric," he said, "you were remembered before you even left the ring. You're not just remembered. You're immortal." It was a rare moment of vulnerability. For all his larger-than-life persona, for all the struts and chops and woo-s, Ric Flair was still a man. A father. A friend. A human being terrified that everything he built might disappear once the cheers faded. But they never faded. WWE announced a tribute show. Not a farewell. Not a memorial. A celebration. The Nature of Greatness, a tribute to Ric Flair. Set to air live from Charlotte, North Carolina, it would bring together superstars from every era, past, present, and even some competitors from other promotions, all to honor the man who inspired them. The event was scheduled for later that year. Giving Flair something tangible to aim for. "If I make it to that show," Ric joked to his nurse one day, "you better have a robe and a camera ready. I'm going out the same way I came in. Flashy and loud." In preparation, WWE's creative team began quietly filming behind-the-scenes footage, personal interviews, and unseen archival tapes of Ric's most intimate moments. Triple H, at the center of it all, made one thing clear. This wasn't a goodbye. It was a reminder that legends never truly die. They live in stories, in memories, and in the echoes of their influence. And Flair's echo? It was thunderous. Even now, as doctors monitor his condition day by day, even as uncertainty lingers like a cloud over every test result, there is a light in Ric's eyes. A flicker. A fire. The same fire that carried him through near-fatal airplane crashes. Through heart surgeries. Through a broken back. Through every impossible comeback. Because some men aren't built to fade quietly. Some men were born to roar, and Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, the limousine ridin', jet flyin', kiss stealin', wheelin' and dealin' son of a gun, is not going anywhere without a fight. Not while Triple H is standing beside him, not while Charlotte is holding his hand, and not while a world full of fans are chanting his name. The night of the tribute arrived under a Carolina sky thick with emotion. The nature of greatness. A tribute to Ric Flair wasn't just a wrestling event, it was a reckoning. A night when the business stood still to celebrate a man who had refused to bow to time, illness, or mortality. Tickets had sold out in under an hour. Legends flew in from all over the country. Even rivals who hadn't spoken to Flair in decades were now making the trip, some unsure if they'd be saying goodbye or witnessing a miracle. The crowd filled the Spectrum Center in Charlotte to the brim, the same city where Ric Flair first strutted into the hearts of wrestling fans. The Jumbotron flickered to life. It wasn't his entrance music that played first, it was silence. Then a single voice echoed across the arena, "Ladies and gentlemen, he's still here." And, just like that, the crowd erupted. Triple H stood center stage. Dressed in black, eyes heavy with emotion, but posture strong. He welcomed the audience with a nod, then gestured toward the ramp. The lights dimmed. The video package rolled. A 5-minute cinematic masterpiece of Ric's life, from black and white baby photos, to classic robe-clad entrances, to hospital footage few had seen before. The voiceover was unmistakable. Triple H himself narrating. He was never perfect, but he was always real. And that's why we love him. When the lights returned, the crowd held its breath, then the music hit. The iconic, also Sprach Zarathustra 2001, A Space Odyssey, Ric Flair's entrance theme, and then he walked out, slowly, carefully, but proudly, dressed in a brand new custom robe. Gold, embroidered with the words, "I'm still the man." The crowd was no longer just cheering. They were crying. Fans stood shoulder to shoulder, phones raised, but eyes locked on a legend who simply refused to be forgotten. Charlotte Flair was the first to greet him at the end of the ramp. She embraced him tightly, whispering something only he could hear. Triple H followed. He didn't say a word. He just hugged Ric and held on longer than usual. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the quiet, unspoken message, "You made it, old man." The event that followed was unlike anything the WWE Universe had seen. Not a match. Not a roast. But a stage play of emotion, footage, tributes, and storytelling. John Cena took the mic and said, "Every time I looked in a mirror before a promo, I asked myself, would Ric say this?" The Undertaker spoke softly, saying, "I laid many to rest. But Ric? He keeps coming back." Even rivals like Bret Hart and Mick Foley offered tearful words, setting aside history to acknowledge something greater than kayfabe, legacy. But the most powerful speech came from Ric himself, escorted to the center of the ring, microphone in hand. His voice quivered, but it was unmistakably his. "I should have been gone years ago," he began. "I was told I wouldn't make it through heart surgery. I was told I wouldn't wrestle again. And now I've got doctors telling me I shouldn't be standing right now. But guess what? Whoa." The crowd answered with a thunderous whoa that shook the walls. "I don't know how long I've got," Ric continued. "But however long it is, I'm gonna live it like I always have. Loud, proud, and in love with this business." He looked toward Triple H. "You saved my life, Paul. Not just now, but many times. When I was lost. When I was broken. You reminded me I wasn't finished. And, because of you, because of all of you, I'm still standing." That night ended not with a send-off, but with a celebration. Ric Flair's name was etched into the Titantron in blazing gold letters, "Forever the Man." Fans didn't leave the arena feeling mournful. They left feeling inspired. The Nature Boy wasn't done. In the weeks that followed, WWE announced a new initiative, the Flair Foundation, spearheaded by Triple H, dedicated to cancer research, wrestler health support, and mentoring the next generation of talent. Ric may never wrestle again, but he would shape the business forever. Backstage, Triple H was asked privately what it meant to him. He answered simply, "It means I still have my friend. For now, and maybe."